You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Jazz Cabbage. I'm Chala June, your host and gentle guide on this mind-opening exploration of the crossroads between cannabis, food, and beverage. On today's episode, we'll be diving deeper into the and beverage side of things, breaking down the barriers that have long divided cannabis and America's favorite pastime, drinking. Now, while THC and alcohol are not an ideal combination for everybody, there is a unique social experience that can be unlocked from intentionally pairing wine and spirits with cannabis flower, especially when there's also food on the table. But even when we set the booze aside, the recent meteoric rise of cannabis-infused canned drinks has opened up a new world for those who have cut back or cut out alcohol, but still seek a cheeky buzz from their beverage of choice. And now that THC cocktails, seltzers, and tonics have started flying off the shelves at popular grocery chains like Erewhon and Stu Leonard's, cannabis is as accessible and first-timer friendly as it's ever been. And we have cocktail culture to thank. For those who like to build their own bar cart, it's also never been easier to make your own weed-infused shrubs, simple syrups, and more at home. And that's thanks to books like High Times Cannabis Cocktails, written by sommelier and today's guest, Jamie Evans. This week, I sat down with Jamie to talk about everything, from the unlikely relationship between wine and weed to the many ways to craft infused drinks at home. This is part one of our two-part examination of cannabis and its connection to cocktail culture. Today on Jazz Cabbage, I have the distinct pleasure of chatting with Jamie Evans, aka the Herb Somm. Jamie is a San Francisco-based writer, entrepreneur, certified sommelier, and four-time cookbook author, with her latest book, High Times Cannabis Cocktails, hitting shelves just this past July. Jamie, welcome to Jazz Cabbage. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. Is there anything that you'd like to add to my Cliff Notes introduction?
Well, I think that was a wonderful introduction, Chala. So thank you so much for having me on the show. And hello to all of your listeners. And I'm just thrilled to be here to speak with you today.
I'm so excited, and I know it's going to be a great episode because I can't name a single time that I've had a conversation with you where I haven't walked away with some new tidbit of information or perspective or food for thought. To give the audience a little bit of context, you and I, like a number of guests that I've had on the show, first met a few years ago now at LMCC, the Luxury Meets Cannabis Conference here in New York. And I remember so distinctly that day you coming up to me and introducing yourself and us having this really lovely chat about this intersection of cannabis and food and wine. And that moment really stuck with me because I was still relatively new to this cannabis world and this cannabis community. And you had met me with such warmth and kindness. And so I just want to say thank you for that because it can be really daunting when you're first getting into the cannabis space and you don't really know too many people and you feel like the new kid at school.
Absolutely. And I do think there's such a great intersection between the culinary world and cannabis world, which we'll talk a lot about today. But that was a very special moment for me as well. And I think that was when my second book, Cannabis Drinks, Secrets to Crafting CBD and THC, just came out. So I was just really excited to give you a copy and continue the conversation about food and beverages and cannabis.
And like you said, there is really so much that can be gleaned from this intersection. There's so much beautiful overlap and interplay with cannabis and with food. And you're someone whose career really speaks specifically to that. And the Herb Somm isn't just a cute moniker. You actually have a degree in wine and viticulture, and you're a certified sommelier and a sake sommelier as well, which I didn't know was a certification that you could get, but it makes so much sense considering how much history is there as well.
Exactly.
I'm wondering what first piqued your interest in the world of wine and spirits and when cannabis started to make its way into the picture.
Yeah, well, I come from a long history of working in the wine industry, as you mentioned. So at the young age of 18, I started studying wine and viticulture at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So during my years as a student, it was an incredible experience at Cal Poly. They truly make you do everything from growing your own grapevines to making your own wine. And then also I had the opportunity to travel and study wine abroad in Australia, France, Italy, and Switzerland. So really coming out of college, I just had this very in-depth understanding of wine from an international perspective and really kind of fell in love with that industry for many years. But I always say, while wine will always be my first love, cannabis has really been my muse over these past several years. So my relationship with cannabis actually began back in college, so during those times. And I can remember coming home from my wine sensory evaluation classes and smelling through different cannabis strains and really thinking to myself, wow, there is like so much, like these aromas and flavors, they're very similar to wine. Back then, there wasn't a lot of information about cannabis, and certainly the conversation about cannabis was a lot different than what we see today. No one was talking about culinary cannabis back then.
Right.
So it really wasn't until January 2017 that I began using cannabis for medical purposes and started really researching it. And actually during that time, I was looking for cannabis to really help me sleep. I had witnessed a really bad car accident and I didn't want to take pharmaceutical drugs. And so I really turned to cannabis, which was this natural alternative that really changed my life. It not only helped with my sleep, but it helped me connect with my body and my soul and really brought me into this new community in San Francisco kind of during that time as well. So San Francisco is such a culinary city in its own way, as we all know. But during that time, there was these underground dinners that were happening. And I was meeting different cannabis chefs and edible producers. And I just thought like, wow, this is so interesting how people are treating cannabis as a culinary or gourmet item and really cooking with it or mixing it with drinks. So that's when I got this idea from the Herb Somm and really wanted to kind of dive into the culinary side of the industry.
And it's really incredible because, like you mentioned, there's this community that exists around culinary cannabis that's been getting stronger and stronger over the years, but a thread that continues to come up as I have more of these conversations with people is that once you start really intentionally bringing cannabis into the center of your life in this way, it also draws all of these incredible people into your life as well. And that community really starts to form itself really naturally. And I remember in a past interview when we've spoken, you'd mentioned that a big part of what really eased this transition into cannabis, especially coming from the traditionally male-dominated world of wine, was getting to create the support network of incredible female founders and entrepreneurs who all worked in weed. How did that community support you as you started building the Herb Somm brand?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think like all the women I've met just throughout this entire experience working with cannabis has been one of the reasons why I'm just very passionate about this space, especially in the culinary side to cannabis. There's so many incredible women that have really paved the way for creators and people like me over the years. And there's a lot of chefs that I've worked with that really taught me how to cook with cannabis. So just off the top of my head, Chef Corinne Carroll, she was probably one of the first chefs that I met in San Francisco. And she taught me so much about working with the plant, how to create infusions and decarboxylation and everything that you need to know to create a cannabis-infused item. And so really these wonderful women, they've been mentors, they've been friends, and we've really seen each other grow throughout the years in this space. And I think it's just been extremely rewarding to be surrounded with a community of powerful women. So yeah, there's something very special about that community.
That's so incredible and so beautiful because so often, especially both in food and in cannabis, you kind of see a lot of these men being touted as sort of the faces of the industry, but there are so many incredible women who have been working behind the scenes. And it's great that we're starting to get to a point where behind the scenes doesn't really have to be a thing anymore. And we're able to see so many of these women rightfully take their space in the front of this industry, at the forefront, really channeling change and channeling what this industry can and should look like as we move forward. And I absolutely consider you to be one of those people as well. I mean, you're a 4-time author, and every single time that you have a new book out, that really helps and concretizes and legitimizes this sphere, especially of culinary cannabis, that we're all so passionate about and all really working so hard to legitimize in this way. So when you first started the Herb Somm back in 2017, you were also working with a group of chefs, with different chefs in California, to do a dinner series called Thursday Infused, where you were creating very intentional pairings between the cannabis, the wine, and the food that was being served. What was it, that experience, like to be curating that series, and how did that help you really establish the Herb Somm as what it is today?
During that time, it was so much fun. I worked with many different chefs throughout that dinner series, and it was just amazing because every time that I would work with each chef, they had their own approach to working with the infusions, how they worked with cannabis in the kitchen. So every menu was completely different. It was just so much fun to learn how each chef was working with the ingredients, and then thinking how I can pair the wine with the meal. And then we'd actually all sit down together. Like, we'd work with cannabis producers as well. So we'd have flower pairings with the meal. We'd all sit down together and taste the wine, the ingredients, and the flower, and think about what we wanted to present to our dinner guests, and then craft the menu from there. So it was really taking cannabis one step further and really providing this very elevated gourmet experience, much like you would find in the wine industry. So coming from wine and hosting all these winemaker dinners over the years, I just wanted to bring that experience to cannabis and give people a space to sit down with their friends, enjoy like a low dose infused meal, and be able to talk about cannabis and treat it more as just something that you would want against your favorite foods. So that was my thought process behind Thursday Infused. And yeah, just over the years, I worked with some incredible chefs through that series, and hopefully I'll bring it back one day. You never know.
Absolutely. Listen, if you bring it back, you know exactly where to send an invitation.
Yeah, I tried to do one in New York, actually, and this was March 2020. So we got a little sidetracked with COVID, but we were on our way to do that there. That's something I'd love to bring back.
The time is coming. And especially now that New York's recreational market is really off the ground, unlike in March 2020, I think that we'd be ready for it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And something that I really love about your work and just your approach is that you really lean on your background in viticulture to break cannabis science down in a way that's really approachable and familiar and fun. I'm constantly explaining to folks how different strains of weed can be treated like different grapes and varietals and wine. And just because your body doesn't agree with a varietal like a Pinot Grigio or a strain like Strawberry Kush, let's say, it doesn't mean you won't enjoy a Cabernet or some Blue Dream. There's something out there to suit everyone's taste and what they're looking for.
It's so true.
But as the actual expert on this, can you speak more to these parallels that you see between wine and cannabis, and how wine education can be this tool to ease people into cannabis education?
Yeah, absolutely. So as it turns out, just like you said, there's just so many similarities when it comes to wine and cannabis. And I think this is what really drew me to the cannabis space from the get-go. So not only do these two categories really share similar aroma and flavor profiles, just like you mentioned, Chala, but they're both very terroir expressive plants. So just like the grapevine, cannabis can really take on this sense of place and practice. And depending on where that cannabis is grown, strains actually express those unique characteristics based on the microclimates that the plant comes from. So it's very much like wine in that way. And, you see these cannabis farmers, they're just like vineyard owners. They care so much about their plants, and
Yes.
they really are a part of that terroir, plays an essential role in that plant's well-being. So even like going up to Mendocino or Humboldt and talking with these farmers, it's very much like that vineyard experience that you get. And it's just a beautiful experience too, that when you actually see the plants and the soil and the sun grown, it's amazing. But also, beyond kind of just like the terroir, there's a lot of similarities when it comes to sensory evaluation techniques. So as the Herb Somm, I talk a lot about how we can evaluate cannabis as we do with wine. So really it's about training our nose and palates to recognize the nuances between each strain. And you really can analyze terpenes, which are the aromatic compounds that come from cannabis, but terpenes are in many different plants, herbs, spices. They're also in wine too, which really makes a pairing concept viable. And so as you train your nose and palate to recognize those smells and tastes in cannabis, it's very much like we do in the wine world. And then one thing additionally about just some similarities between cannabis and wine, out here in California, cannabis is actually becoming appellation specific. So much like the wine industry's American viticulture area, we call it the AVA system, cannabis farmers are actually working towards developing a similar system that's really establishing appellations that define different regions in each county.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And actually, Mendocino County, I think they're the furthest along in establishing these regions. But it's just really interesting to follow and really see how the cannabis industry really does mirror the wine industry in so many ways.
I'm going to go take a smoke break, but we'll be back with more Jazz Cabbage.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheese-making culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old-world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheese-making craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Welcome back, my little cabbages, to more Jazz Cabbage. It makes a lot of sense when you talk about it that way, because people will talk about especially old heads in cannabis will talk about the differences between Mendocino cannabis,
Right.
Humboldt cannabis, Hawaii cannabis, Thai stick, all of this cannabis that comes from these different regions. And yes, of course, that speaks to the individual growers and the conditions. But like you said, it also speaks to the terroir. And
Right.
It's so interesting how we have these concepts in wine and we're able to really be like, oh, well, I'm only really looking for grapes from the Loire Valley or something of the sort. But when it comes to a product like cannabis, a lot of that gets kind of flattened, unfortunately. And something that I'm constantly thinking about when people ask me why I started writing about cannabis and covering this industry and this community through my work is that when it comes to other drugs like alcohol and like caffeine, we get a ton of consumer education through media, through film, through TV, through magazines about what a proper dosage is, what the differences between products are, and how to tell if you've overconsumed or overindulged. Like, you can tell from watching a movie, okay, that person is drunk because, they've had so much, or, oh, that person's had too much caffeine because now they're jittery. But with cannabis, because of all of the secrecy that's been placed on this plant as a result of negative stigma and of criminalization, it can be really challenging for people to get nuanced education about cannabis that goes beyond either just I'm a 90s baby, so I was very much firmly in the dare, just say no era of things.
Yeah.
Or even beyond, we have more that's available now, but a lot of the education that you get is reduced to just indica sativa hybrid, and that's all you really need to know. Which is incredibly reductive and doesn't get into, like you said, the terpenes, the flavors, and how those have different effects and impacts on the body as well. So as someone who intentionally educates folks on both alcohol and on cannabis, can you speak more to why this kind of intentional consumer education is really needed, and especially right now as legalization becomes more widespread?
Oh, of course. Well, I think cannabis education is really the key to breaking stigmas and ending misconceptions. Because the more education we can provide, people will understand the plant, they'll understand the plant's properties and how it can work with their body in so many different ways. It's also very important to educate consumers so they have a very pleasant experience. And there's a golden rule that we say in the cannabis space, which I always tell beginners at all of my events, in my books, it's go low, start slow. So that means begin with a low dose and pace yourself. This is especially true if you're eating an edible or a drinkable, because sometimes you're not going to feel it right away. And some people, if it's their first time, they'll double down and maybe take 2 because they don't feel anything. And then later it hits
We've
you
all
extremely
seen the
hard.
memes.
Yeah. And so I never want someone to have that experience. So really, it's just about educating and answering questions and making people feel comfortable. And that's really why I wanted to have that dinner series in the first place at Thursday Infused, was to provide a platform and a space where people could come, have a very low dose experience. But the amazing thing, too, is actually the chefs during that meal would customize the dose, which is also very important when it comes to cannabis, because we're all so different. And 5 milligrams for someone may feel like 25 milligrams to someone else. So it's just really important to listen to your body, to experiment, but start with a low dosage and kind of work your way up from there. And I think as a new person too, if you're a little bit worried about trying Delta 9 THC, a great place to start is maybe CBD or something that can give you just that cannabis experience, and then kind of work your way up from there.
Absolutely. And I love this concept of tailoring the dosage to each person, because similarly, like with alcohol, I'm someone who I'll do 3 shots and I can still be standing. A friend of mine, 1 shot and she's on the floor. All of our bodies process, these different things at varying speeds. Our metabolisms are all different. And just genetically also, we are predisposed to handle different things in different ways. And
absolutely,
it can be really disheartening to see people kind of write cannabis off as a whole because of one bad experience. And because of maybe an experience where they didn't know the dosage, so they've sworn off of edibles for good, or they had that experience where they ate it and they didn't wait long enough and they're like, oh, this edible's not doing anything. And then suddenly they're in the stratosphere. But for so many people, I'm constantly trying to encourage them, like you said, start low, go slow, try again, try with maybe a food that's also more familiar to you. Not everybody has to start with a cosmic brownie. If you eat oatmeal every day, put a little weed butter in your oatmeal and see what that does for you, if you drink coffee every day, try a little CBD simple syrup in your coffee and see what that does for you. Just really figuring out where it can fit into your own personal life and your own personal routine can make such a world of difference. And that's what I really love about this intersection of food and beverage and cannabis is there are so many opportunities for people to figure out what works for them, for their lifestyle, for their habits, and also just what is most enjoyable for them specifically. There is no one size fits all approach.
That's so true. I also think that we're seeing a lot of commercially made cannabis-infused beverages come out.
Yes,
and
we are.
Beverages are very approachable. I think we live in a society where we just naturally love beverages as they are. So I mean, you can find everything from cannabis-infused apple cider, cannabis-infused seltzers, cannabis-infused dealcoholized wine. I mean, there's really something for everyone. And a lot of these beverages, they're very low dose and they're fast acting. So you'll feel the beverage anywhere between like 5 to 15 minutes, which is giving people a great alternative to alcohol as well. So I think as people are not wanting to drink alcohol as much, cannabis beverages have really become this fantastic alternative that you can bring to social settings. They're very sessionable. You can even get that little buzz that you're looking for. So I'm just really excited about the overall beverage category.
Yes, and I personally love the cannabis beverages. Like you said, there are seltzers, there's lemonades, there's iced teas. There's really something for everyone. Shameless plug of my own work that I did write a little roundup of some of the best THC drinks out there for bonappetit.com.
Oh, I remember that one.
If anyone is interested in learning more. But you quite literally wrote the book on cannabis cocktails. In fact, you have written 4 of them. And with each one, there is just so much more to glean and so much more to really explore and play around with. That's what I really love about your books too, is there is so much playfulness to the recipes that you develop. There's also so many different infusion methods that you use, from being able to infuse directly into alcohol to making THC or CBD sugars or syrups or vinegar shrubs. So I'm really curious as to what first sparked your passion for infusing drinks specifically, and why folks might want to try their hand at making infused drinks at home.
Yeah, so I think just coming from the wine world, the beverage side of cannabis was always been like very, very fascinating to me. And I always loved working in the kitchen, creating different infusions. And in all of my books, just like you said, I love to teach people how to build their own bar pantry before you actually start infusing drinks. So this is infusing anything from simple syrups to bitters to shrubs, like you mentioned, Chala, and really give you kind of like the tools that you need to then go infuse any type of beverage that you can imagine. And so in my latest book, it's actually a seasonal cocktail book. So this is the High Times Cannabis Cocktails book. So this was a very fun book to write because we eat and drink so seasonally throughout the year. And so when I was crafting this book, I was thinking what kind of fruits, what kind of vegetables are coming from the garden in spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and then creating the recipes from there. And it was so much fun for me, and just creating all those different infusions. It was funny too, because people would actually come over to my house and they would open my refrigerator. And then I looked like a mad scientist because there would be different infused products of everything you could think of that I was experimenting with to see what worked and what didn't work. But it was just a lot of fun. And I think creating your own infusions as well, it really gives you the power to customize that infusion based on what type of flower you want to use or a concentrate that you're really drawn to. So I think, creating your own products at home really gives you the power to do that. But one thing that's a little bit different than commercially made products is you really have to estimate the dose by doing a calculation at home, because it's never going to be as precise as if you buy a product from a licensed dispensary. So there's always some experiments that goes on in the kitchen when it comes to that. But yeah, it's always about estimating the dose. And then always, like I say in my books, is make sure to sample maybe like a 1/4 teaspoon to gauge the potency, but like definitely before serving it to others. That's definitely key. But the more you start like working in the kitchen with flour, with concentrates, it gets very easy and very fun.
I love that you've taken this seasonal approach in the latest book, because you're so right. We drink different drinks in different times of the year. Like, I'm thinking about how excited I am for a hot apple cider the second there's a little bit of chill in the air,
I know.
And I really do love how much versatility there is in your books and how many different kinds of drinks and items you can infuse, because I'm one of those people, I constantly have 3 different drinks going on at once. Like I have my water, I've got my tea, I've got an orange juice, maybe there's a seltzer somewhere in the background.
Same.
And there are so many ways that people can really approach just enjoying a little bit of cannabis in a way that is so familiar. And like you said, also very discreet. You're not smoking, you're not putting any odors into the air. Nobody really needs to know other than you, which is really great. Especially, you know, I know people who have used cannabis for pre-workout, post-workout. Maybe it helps them with focus. Maybe it helps them with relaxation. And you don't always want everybody to be all up in your business and asking, what are you smoking? Or asking, you know, why your clothes smell a certain way. So there is this really beautiful niche that cannabis drinks are able to fill in people's life, where they do want that kind of more personalized experience that is really just for them. And so I'm very curious, because you have written dozens and dozens of recipes, but I would love to know what some of your favorite recipes that you've developed are.
Oh my goodness. Well, it is the summer season, and I think currently I just love working with fresh melon. So whether it's watermelon or honeydew or cantaloupe, I love mixing that into different drinks. So in my new book, there's actually a honeydew melon margarita, which I absolutely love. It's delicious. I actually created a drink called the Forbidden Fruit Fizz. And so this drink was created based off the flavors of forbidden fruit, which is one of my favorite cannabis strains out there. So it's actually a mix of the strains cherry pie and tangy. So there's a lot of cherry notes. There's some like tangerine notes. It's just a beautiful drink. And this is actually a mocktail as well. I think this book is just really approachable, though, because it does cover every drink category. There's juices, there's coffee drinks, there's hot tea drinks. You mentioned an apple cider. There's actually a caramel apple hot toddy for you, Chala, in the fall season.
Yeah, bookmarking that one.
Yeah. So it was just, for me, it was just so much fun thinking about what flavors for each season and then coming up with the recipes from there. But yeah, those are 2 of my favorite at the moment. I also love a lot of savory drinks. And so there's a really good spicy mezcal michelada in the book as well.
I love a mezcal anything. So you sign me up for all of the above. I'm really here for all of it. So as we start wrapping up this conversation, one question that I really have is about just the misconceptions that there are around cannabis when it comes to being able to really enjoy it in a mindful way alongside alcohol. Because there are a lot of people, and everyone, consult your own personal health, listen to your body, do what feels good for you. But I know I personally, when I'm drinking, if I feel like maybe I've drank a little more than I wanted to, or if I feel like I drank something that isn't really sitting well with me, a couple of hits off of a joint or a little CBD really helps bring me back into myself. It helps balance me out. And also, I find personally, I'm not a medical professional. Everybody consult your own physician. I don't know the science, but I personally, in my experience, find that if I'm also consuming cannabis, I don't feel as hungover the next morning. I am able to kind of recover a little bit better. And so I would love to hear you speak to the interplay that cannabis and alcohol can have and how they're able to support each other and don't necessarily need to be at odds with one another.
Oh, absolutely. But I, first of all, like to say, like, mixing cannabis and alcohol is probably not for everyone, like you mentioned before.
Yes, not for everybody.
Yeah, it's not for everybody. But if you're going to do it, just make sure to combine the 2 in moderation. I think that's the key to a very enjoyable experience, especially if you're not used to mixing the 2 together. Especially in some of the cocktails, like in my book, there are cannabis and alcohol in the same drink. But I like to say is use a very small dosage of cannabis if you're going to mix it into your cocktail for the first time. And I like to say between 1 to 2.5 milligrams of THC, and then kind of like work your way up based on your experience with it. But me personally, I do like to combine the 2. I think sometimes if I'm just enjoying cannabis alone, I can really get in my head. And I think cannabis just really help, or like when I have like a glass of wine or maybe a little cocktail to go along with it, it just really helps balance me out for that really enjoyable experience. But again, it's just about moderation. Never drive. That's a very key thing too. Just remember,
very key.
Just enjoy responsibly, just like we say in the alcohol industry as well. But yeah, I think you can do it in a very smart way. It's just listening to your body. And like we said at the beginning of the show, go low, start slow. It's like almost the same philosophy.
Absolutely. Jamie, thank you so much again for coming on the show, for imparting all of your wisdom, for just all of the work you do. And I would love to know what you're working on these days and how our listeners can keep up with you.
Oh, yes. So I am actually launching a mobile bartending company. It's called the Herbal Cocktail Co. We just launched about a month ago. So we are doing private events and offering cannabis-infused craft cocktails. And they're actually mocktails at these events. So if you're looking for a wonderful kind of private event experience and you want something different than alcohol, definitely keep me in mind. And you can find more information always on my Instagram at the Herb Somm. And then my website is theherbsomm.com.
Thank you. Everyone hit up Jamie to do your weed wedding. I've heard the weed weddings are really taking off. So someone out there is having a weed wedding. Thank you again so much. I'm really so grateful to you for coming on the show. And I cannot wait to make that hot toddy and try it out.
I can't wait for you to make it as well, Chala. And thank you so much for having me on the show. It's always such a pleasure speaking with you and sharing our passions for culinary cannabis.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Check out our show notes to learn more about our guests and other cannabis resources. Jazz Cabbage is produced by Taylor Early, H. Conley, and me, Chala June. Sound design and mixing is by Sam Gerardi. Jazz Cabbage is powered by Simplecast. Jazz Cabbage, hosted by Chala June, is a production of Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe. For more Jazz Cabbage shenanigans, find us on Instagram at JazzCabbagePod. If you want to drop me a note, you can write to the pod at jazzcabbagepodcast@gmail.com.